Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, our first official webinar as Decision Inc. Australia. So a bit of a historical moment here today. So cool. We're going to take a look today at data modernization with QDI and Snowflake. We'll get through the housekeeping in just a second. So what we're going to try and achieve today, or the sort of the real question we're going to try and answer, and this is sort of the whole topic of this webinar, is how can we empower remote employees to make better and faster data-driven decisions? And we're going to spend a little bit of time on discussing why that's important, why we need to start caring about rethinking our position in data. So just quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. By means of introduction, my name is Hein Tolliard. I'm the digital practice lead, and sort of on a day-to-day basis, my job is to help our customers understand how do you go through this, modern workplace development. How do you start thinking about a modern data platform? So it's all the stuff around getting into the sort of the new era of technology. Joining me today is my friend and colleague, Ivan van Rooyen. He's a senior data engineer. Ivan, do you want to maybe do a bit of introduction on yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Hein. So my role in Decisioning Australia is the data engineer. We take your data from point A to point B, making sure it is done in the optimal way. We help you through your path, get the right way to do it, use the right tools, make sure everything is accurate from point A to the end, right to the end. Right. Thank you, Hein.
Cool. So what we're going to take a look at today is just why exactly we should care about changing the way we look at data. We're going to take a quick look at what does a modern data platform look like, because it's quite a mouthful, so we want to understand what it actually is. Ivan and myself are going to do a quick demo, and we're going to try and spend more time on the demo than I'm going to spend talking. And finally, we will have an official Q&A at the end, but please feel free to ask any questions during the webinar. We'll be monitoring the Q&A the whole time. So first things first is, why should we start caring about a modern data platform? Now, over the last, call it 2 or 3 years, this concept of the fourth industrial revolution has been quite a prominent player in IT discussions. So if we had to think about 200 years ago with the invention of the steam engine, what happened is we fundamentally shifted, right? Is we all of a sudden could pull more, push more, transport more. That led into the era where we obviously started assembly lines, electricity, and all those kind of things. Then there was the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates era, where the big computing boom, and then the era that we're in now is generally called the era of intelligence. And now, what's interesting to understand at this point is that you'll notice the internet is not is the internet the boom of the internet rather wasn't a big enough event to actually quantify an industrial revolution, which is quite scary considering how big and prominent the internet is. It does give you a sense of how important the idea about this intelligent era is. And one of sort of in the decisioning group, one of our sort of favorite analogies around this is something like Tesla, right? It's not only about the car being electric and looking good. It's not even about the car being able to talk to the internet, right? It's about what happens with that information, right? How is that information processed from the car to the Tesla dealer? How does that information get disseminated in the ecosystem? How's it used, right? So the data, just the raw data of the car being transformed into something that drives the customer experience, drives the business operations, and so on and so forth. So what does this mean for us in in the real world, right? It doesn't mean we need to put a sensor in everybody's seat and we don't need to be monitoring every keystroke on every keyboard. But what it does mean for us is that data and analytics need to become the core pillar of our business. If we look at our sort of diagram that we're looking at right now, every single piece of our business and of our daily lives generates data that affects us in some way, shape, or form, right? Whether it's our traditional back office ERP type systems, or it's social media, or it's data from IoT, all of these things are elements of our business that we need to start considering. And that's where it goes from your let's look at number of sales over the last week to it needs to be part of your business ecosystem. So typically how this is done, if you had to look at what the sort of the evolution of data and how we go from that sort of mode one where we were 15, 20, 25 years ago to an organization that actually leverages data to drive the business operation. It's around going through these little waves where it starts with, your very functional reporting, which we all know and love, and then sort of getting into the business intelligence era, which is, I would say, in its mature stage now. But to really take advantage of data, we need to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it with data. And that's where we start moving into this green block, right? And stuff like AI, machine learning, working with unstructured data, which is incredibly popular these days. Your data scientists, augmented analytics, all of those kind of things all sit in this green block. The challenge that we face as CIOs and as IT departments is that the majority of our business still sits in the bottom half of the first block, where we have either very legacy reporting that is pulled through massive ETL pipelines, pushed into a cube. Any change takes 4 months to do, or we're stuck in this BI rat's nest of having 100-click or Tableau dashboards deployed all over the show. Nobody agrees on the sales number, and we're struggling to get past that point. So if we had to look at what the problem is around why aren't we transitioning faster, because I'm sure that nobody wants to stay behind, but it's a very difficult challenge to move through this pipeline. And that's pretty much because on the sort of old, sort of call it the generation one type reporting, you had very structured, very governed information catered for and controlled by IT. So there was a lot of sort of agreement throughout the company that the number that we're looking at is the same number all over the show. The problem is it's very expensive and it's very difficult to change. That then gave birth to what we now just generally call the BI era, where you've got self-service BI models running everywhere. You don't need a developer to connect to a data source. You can connect to any type of data source. It doesn't even have to be through your traditional sort of structured SQL type data sources, which is great from a consumer perspective. I can get analytics very quickly, but it does raise the question is which version of the sales number is right? It is on almost a daily basis that we talk to any one of our customers which sort of has a large BI deployment where 2 or 3 people would have the same dashboard deployed, all built differently, very low governance, and it's very messy. One of our big sort of government prospects actually said that's his main problem in the data world at the moment. He's got a whole data pipeline. Everything was sort of set up, sort of this Gen 1 stuff, and just at the moment, nobody's using it because everybody's got their own version of a Tableau dashboard running. So that's sort of a challenge, right? And that is really where we want to introduce the modern data platform, right? So it's how can we bring the speed and the simplicity of the sort of modern BI era and combine that with the rigor and governance of your generation 1 stuff. And how can we do this in a way that's going to be sort of future-proof, right? Because we need to start considering that we can't do this, just spin up a SQL server on-premise. It needs to be cloud ready. We need to consider how does my remote workforce, if 90% of my workforce is going to be remote, how do they engage with this, right? How does my infrastructure hold up? One of our large insurance customers, one of their particular sort of main data workers, a close friend of mine, he actually said is that on a daily basis they struggle to just to cope with the VPN, right? Because there's traffic that's going to be prioritized over working with reporting and those kind of things. So we need to start thinking about how do we enable this, and how do we enable this quickly, because we can't take another 5 years to respond to what's happening around us. So this is really the crux of the technology conversation today is, what does the modern data platform look like? What is it? How do we roll it out? Is it going to take me a year to do? Luckily not. And how does Snowflake and the Click data integration platform fit in? So a modern data platform is, in summary, it's a combination of technologies that allow you to separate your data organization into 3 distinct areas. So the first one we want to talk about today is the green area, which is really about how do I ingest data from my production systems in a way that's going to be low impact, and it needs to be live. It needs to be near real time. There's no point of looking at sales numbers of a week ago. The second portion is really around the data storage and working with data areas, because now that we've ingested it, we've pulled it from our source systems, it needs to sit in a lake or a data platform, and that needs to be sort of worked in such a manner that it's not only consumed by your traditional BI tools and your traditional reporting tools, but we also need to start considering the fact that machine learning, AI models, those kind of things are going to become customers of data, right? And that's why we can't just go aggregate all our data on source and just push it somewhere because somebody needs to connect to a simplified data model. We need to think about who are we actually delivering data to. So right on top is a good example of that. We'll see that we've got applications that will access our data. We've got a lot of organizations where the data actually becomes the business, right? Where you've got APIs built around this. We're busy working with a customer on exactly this model now, where they are traditionally where they would produce data sets and deliver them is how do you actually build a data pipeline to build an API that'll be used as the product of the business. And then as we go through this process, then you'll obviously have your data scientists who want to get into the low-level transactional details, but you also have the sales manager that just wants to see, the relevant sales information. He wants to get it in 5 minutes. So the breadth of customers that we need to serve in a data platform has become quite broad, and it puts quite a bit of stress on the IT department to actually deliver that. In a real world scenario where we actually start talking about technology and not just blocks on a PowerPoint presentation, a modern data platform could look something like this. So on the far left hand side, we will have all our source systems that we need to ingest, and then we'll go through some sort of streaming pipeline and automation process where we replicate and compose various types of data sources, and then store it into a data platform like Snowflake. And then finally, that is surfaced to the business in an intuitive way where we don't have to figure out connection strings and all those kind of things. Our business users don't particularly care. I want to find data. I want to know that it's the right data I'm looking at, and I want to surface that in an analytics tool that's going to be simple to use. So the first portion that we're going to look at today is the streaming component, right? How do I get data, right? What do I need to consider when I need to get data out of my source systems and into my data platform? So there are a couple of key pillars we need to consider here. So the first things first, as I've mentioned a few times, is we need to look at getting near real-time data. There's no point in looking at old antiquated data. We want to be able to get that information or do reporting on information that we know is relevant, right? And what's very important is we can't impact our production systems. We need to have a way where we can read this data without slowing down the systems. On top of that, one of the things that you need to consider is in most organizations, you will have a little bit of SQL, a little bit of Oracle, a little bit of SAP. Each one of those have its own integration tools, which you need to buy licenses for, and you need skills for. So it becomes quite an expensive exercise when you need to combine all of these different types of systems into one data platform. Because nobody wants to have 5 different analytics tools and all those kind of things, right? So we need to have one platform that can connect to anything. Ivan can attest to point number 3 over here, because I'm pretty sure this is where he spends most of his time, pre-QDI, is the ability to automate these pipelines and automate model generation. So one of the big things that you're going to struggle with in any data and project is if you're looking at source data, what does the analytics model look like? How do the relationships look like? So every single system, you need to go understand the database, understand the schema, and that takes time, and that's resource intensive. So the ability to automatically compose this sort of data model around our source systems and push that into our data platform becomes critical to the speed of actually producing these projects. And then finally, scale and stability is always going to be important. There's no point once we're pushing in a couple of billion records at a time. We can't have our data platform fall over. So I'm not going to go into too much of the show and tell and screenshots and stuff right now. I don't want to steal too much of Ivan's thunder, so we're just going to move along. The second component, and really where we're sort of the pillar around today, is your data platform, right? So in today's webinar, we're going to really focus on Snowflake as the centralized data platform. And what do we need to consider over here, right? So there are a couple of core components to this, right? So AWS, Google, Microsoft, all of the big cloud providers are giving us, relatively accessible data tools. But so the challenge that we face with these things is typically the governance around that is a little bit complicated, and it becomes quite expensive to run. And it's become sort of the new gotcha in IT that once you've started investing and ingesting information into something like Azure, that's quite an investment you need to make. So once you've sort of picked your platform, you're almost stuck with it. So the ability to chop and change your data platform, as we'll see a little bit later, that sits on top of these service providers, becomes quite important. One of the things which is really, really important, and it has been highlighted in a big way with COVID, is the speed that I can roll out the platform and how much maintenance it takes. Now, Snowflake, with the tenants and stuff that Ivan and I set up when we do our demos and those kind of things, it takes you about 5 minutes to set up, and you have 0 maintenance, right? Which is particularly important considering when the COVID exodus happened and everybody ran out of the CBD. IT didn't have months to plan infrastructure and stuff. You needed to be able to respond to these data requirements in hours. Right, and this is really where something like Snowflake shines, because there is a 0 infrastructure setup time. So what does this look like when you've now sort of broken, or sort of devolved your old sort of data structure, and what does your data structure look like when you look at something like Snowflake as your core data pillar? As I said earlier, we can see here that it becomes the central point of everything, and what's very important, it runs on top of your cloud provider. So you're not necessarily stuck in one of these once you've made the choice. It gives you that flexibility to try and move if you so need. What's great about the platform is everything around your sort of data stuff, not only your traditional ETL2 reporting can sit around this. You can have your DevOps pipelines integrate with it. You can feed it to your data scientists. You can push your data to your data marts or your marketplaces. It gives us that flexibility to say, all right, well, all components of your data landscape can work with and through Snowflake. One of the critical things when we consider our sort of data platform is cost, right? So once again, back to my Exodus example, once we've loaded, so we've spun up our Snowflake instance, and our initial data load needs to happen nearly immediately. And the challenge with your sort of traditional, if you can call it traditional, sort of data sort of platforms, is that you can scale up, right? And the scale up becomes very expensive very quickly. But because of the way the Snowflake costing model works, it allows us to scale up, but also scale out. So we can add more servers and add bigger servers. And because we're paying per compute per second, we can get a lot faster. So if we're loading up 1 billion records, right, we can ramp up our server. It'll go quickly, and we're not paying for the server cost and as an outright fee. Because we're paying per second, we can ramp it up and very quickly scale back down once our big data load is complete. So we're going to finish off today by looking at, once we've now ingested all of this information into our data platform, how does this look from the business user's perspective? And this is really where we want that shopping cart experience, because no user wants to go write SQL code to get information out. So we've got a few screenshots over here where we talk about just what does this data look like? How do I search for data? What does my data sets look like? So because we need to start considering these data sets as business assets. How do I publish this to my BI tools, and how do I work with quite a diverse range of stuff? And very importantly, once we've ingested this data from our source systems, how do I protect my customer data, right? Because what we don't want to do is have PII data exposed for the whole world to see, or at least everybody in the organization to see. How can we protect that sensitive customer information? Lastly, which we're sort of going to take a quick look at today, it's really not the focus, is once we found our data, how do we, as the business user, consume it? Which we'll take a quick look at how quickly we can go from finding data to getting some insights, and we're going to use our sales manager example again. And with that, it's over to Ivan to start off the demo.
All right. Let me just quickly share my screen. And it should be up. And can you just confirm that for me, please?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
All right, cool. Right, so welcome to Snowflake. This is just the interface. Just want to give you a little overview of what it looks like. Very similar to what we saw in SQL Server Management Studio, with your Object Explorer on the left and your query space in the middle. And then if you wanted to view data at the bottom here, you could see it. I'll get into more detail about that a bit later. We'll just start off with the replicate, because this is where we're going to be going to. I'm going to be moving the data from a SQL Server instance to our replicated database. After that, we'll do a compose where we create the data warehouse and a data mart. Right, replicate, here we are. Simple interface, nothing funny. It's clean, it's simple, and this is what you would be welcome to. You can monitor your pipelines that have been loaded previously. Here they are. Right now, these are all stopped because we're not running anything right now. We can adjust our endpoints just to manage our connections. We're going to be using the QDI demo, which is just a SQL Server source, and we're going to be pumping it to a Snowflake instance. Standard procedure of credentials, nothing funny. So let's start off. I'm going to start this project with the full CDC functionality of Replicate. Now, the CDC functionality is one of the great things about this platform. It utilizes the source system's transaction logs to determine which records have been replicated and which ones haven't. Now, because it uses the transaction logs, it's not using huge queries that are impacting your production system constantly. So this is something that can be happening sub-second. It's a small platform that's being used. So it's instant and minimal impact to your production systems. Cool. So here we go. I'm just going to be dragging our source and our Snowflake destination. We're going to be selecting our tables. So this is something typically your data engineers would be going through. They'll be investigating where these tables are coming from, what they're doing, how we're going to get to them. Today, I'm going to do a full lift and shift of a schema. Today, we're going to use sales, and we see the tables that are within that schema. I'm going to add all of them, but obviously, depending on your requirements, you can add or remove tables as you need. You can also add more than one schema if you want, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to be using one for now. Here we can see our tables that are going to be loaded in the schema. We also have the option here to, we also have the option here to select specific transformations and specific columns. You can see which columns you can add, which ones you can remove. You can add specific columns. You can do specific filters if you needed to. It's all entirely up to what the project requires. So I'm going to start this project off. Just going to be copying those tables over to our destination. And you can see the project starts off. So what it's doing now, it's generating the code in the background that takes all this source data, all those tables, all those schemas, and those structures, and taking it to our destination. You can see how smooth and quick that is, and it's running as it goes. Great. Database has been replicated. We can view that into Snowflake. We can see the replicated new. There's our sales schema, and there are the tables all that have been replicated. Great. There's CT tables as well. These are the change tracking tables, just to monitor. It's internal tables that QDI utilizes to monitor which have been changes and what's been taken over and what not. Great. So that's your replicate in a nutshell. What also happens is if you do an update, it picks up the update immediately and it transfers it to your destination as well. It happens instantly, and you'll just notice that it inserted into those tables in our replicated tables as you go along. We can also just preview this, and you'll see the data is within our database. Replicate in a nutshell. 5 minutes and we're done. So let's go over to compose. And this is what it would look like. And let's use a scenario of your sales manager decides we need to have extra information from the sales data source. First things first, we've got our connection set up. We're going to be using the Snowflake instance, and we're going to be using our replicated as our sources as well. Cool. Start off. Oops, sorry. First, we got to discover. We've got to pick up what are our objects within our source system. So here you're going to see how it automatically picks up the relationships, picks up the information that we've got, and creates the scripts and the objects that we need to create this end project. There are the tables we've got in the sales schema, and it's going to be generating the model. Great. It's picked up the 9 entities. We've picked up relationships. There are your tables that are all related with each other within that schema. And it's picked up the 78 attributes that are associated with those tables. Great. Happy that the model's been created. Now the next step would be, let's create a data warehouse. Cool. So here we can see all of the tables that are going to be picked up that we're going to be generating. So as a first step, let me just create the instance. It's going through all those steps. You'll notice that it's got satellites and hubs that are mentioned there. So it's using the a data vault approach to this. And it's just come now. Great. I think let's just try and boost this up a little bit, because right now we've got a small instance. So I'm just going to boost this up. So just do a little bit faster. Cool. That's how quick it was just to boost it up, speed it up. Here we go. We've got a larger instance happening, and it's successfully created that for us. In there, I'm just validating the model after we just boosted that. Great. Now we're going to do is we're going to be generating the ETL that actually takes this data from our source and pumps it into a data warehouse. This is the code that typically would have taken a few days, a few weeks, depending on the size of your environment and the complexity of your environment. So right now I've done that in a few seconds. The data team has been busy just watching the screen over there, and giving them the ability to be busy with other stuff. Right, commands have been created. Just for this little simple structure, we've got 532 instructions that has just been created. You can see them and monitor them and see exactly what has been done. Right, I don't know how long it would have taken your developers to create all 532 instructions. Let's run these instructions now and pump that into our data warehouse. Once this gets started, I'll just switch over to an instance that we've already set up for this, just for the interest of time. And there we go, it's kicked off. So while this continues, let's just switch over to our Snowflake query setup and just show you what it looks like. Cool. So once the file has been generated and run an ETL commands done, we've got a fully working data warehouse. We can see the data warehouse if we go back to the worksheets. Just get to the data warehouse. You can see that it's already created our schema. And there are the tables. This is actually the one we've just been run now. So it's, as it goes along, it updates it. Let's close this. Great. So the warehouse is done. It's laying there. We're happy with it. The next step would be, let's go and create a data mart just to isolate what information we are exposing to which audience. So you can see here we've already created a sales transaction. It's got its star schema and its dimensions, but let me take you through the process of creating a new one. Just going to keep the name as it is, just for the demo. I'm going to say it's a transactional one, but you've got the option for aggregated and state-oriented as well. And let's be using the order lines for today. It's now picked up, order lines is the fact table, and it's picked up that these are the dimensions that will be associated to that automatically based on the metadata that comes from our source system. And we're going to be using the picking completed date as our actual transactional point. Cool. So here we are in our data mart we just created. Got the star schema happening there. We can see the order lines as a fact, and there are associated dimensions. So let's create those tables. So it's generating all that code in the background, publishing this to our destination database, and you can see how the naming convention that it uses as well. There we go. Great. Now we've created the actual physical objects. Now we need to move the data into those points. So let's generate the ETL code for that. Okay, so once again, we've just created a bunch of commands, 164 lines of code, or not lines, commands, that would be used to move your data. That would be something that would have taken very long for a developer to physically do themselves as well. So let's run this. While that runs, this is just pumping the data into our destination. So let me show you what it looks like on our destination side. Got the data warehouse done. Now let's look at the data mart. It's coming still, so let me just refresh, and there we go. Right, there we go. There's our data mart, and there are tables that have now been pumped into our data mart. We can see the sales transaction, and we can see the order lines as well. You just run this, just preview the customers over there, and then we've got all our customers lined up and ready. So compose from start to finish, we've created a data warehouse, we've created a data mart in a few minutes. This is something that would typically take a few weeks to implement fully. Let me just show you around about snowflakes a bit. So depending on the role that you've assigned your user, you can have different functionalities and things that you can do within Snowflake. Just to give you a little terminology here, you sort of would have seen the warehouse over here. So that the terminology Snowflake uses is a little bit different to what we used to in a data modeling and a data platform. Whereas a warehouse in Snowflake is actually the compute power that is assigned to your instance. You can have more than one, and you saw me in the demo scaling it up as I needed. But you also have the option to let it automatically scale. You also have the option to have more than one cluster. And you can set it to suspend your instance to save yourself costs. And you've got the option of doing that over 5 minutes, after 10 minutes of inactivity. So you've got the option to really work with your instances. We've got the option to really automate the whole process of improving your performance when needed, and then scaling it down when it's really quiet to save your costs in your business. Right, so your worksheet would be your query environment, as you've seen already, with your data explorer on the side and your data on the bottom here, and you can have your queries run on that side. You got your database, you can view all the databases there, and you can do all sorts of things on your database as well. You can do your tables, you've got views, you've got schemas as well to separate the different database objects. Same thing you would always usually do in your normal databases. But the difference is this is on the cloud and accessible, and it's flexible in a way that you can move it from an Azure instance to an AWS instance, even to a Google Cloud if you needed to. Right, so that's the demo section of what I needed to do. Hein, are you going to show us the QDC?
Great, I'm sure everybody can see my screen.
Yep.
Great stuff, cool. So as exciting as all that data stuff is, and Ivan did a really good job there of showing us how we can go from a traditional on-premise SQL data source into a cloud system. So me as the business user, I can consume that from anywhere with zero impact on my infrastructure, so I can get my job done. The rest of the world that doesn't appreciate data vaults and data marts and all the complex data stuff, we do not particularly care about how the data gets there. It's just for us, we want to obviously have an easy way to find it, right? So when you think about somebody like that sales manager we spoke about earlier, the beauty of what Ivan just showed us is not really going to make a difference in his world, but for him to find customers and link that up to orders, because he wants to on the fly very quickly see where his current open orders are, that's something that's going to make a difference in his life. And that's really where we start talking about Click Catalog. Now, the Click Catalog, effectively what that means for us is it takes all of these data sources that Ivan and his team have generated for us and imports it into a sort of a staging area where our data stewards or the owners of that data can tag it with the right metadata. We can, as I said earlier, obfuscate some of the information that we don't want the business to see, and we can go and search for data and those kind of things. So off the bat, what we see when we log into QDC is a whole bunch of sort of tiles where we can go and navigate through our information. We're not going to show about how we're actually going to ingest the data today, even though that's a few clicks, which we can obviously just demo on demand where needed. But what we're going to look at today is how me as a business user, how can I find information and how can I very quickly publish that to an analytics tool? So the first thing we want to look at is we've got these three little circles on each card, right? And first things first, when we look at operational, you'll see here that as we go down sort of our sort of cards, that it starts going from the green 100% all the way down to 50%. Now, what that means from the operational KPI is how fresh is this data? When last did we do the reload? So we can see here that obviously this reload happened earlier this morning. So this is very, very fresh data. The next piece of the data is the quality. Now, when we start importing data from our source systems, we can write a whole bunch of rules in QDC for our data stewards. Now, once again, that's not something our business users need to worry about. Around, do we expect special characters? Do we allow empty values in ourselves and all those kind of things? The last KPI around sort of these data assets are the popularity. Now, obviously, this is a demo environment, and it's mostly myself and Ivan that use it. So our popularity dwindles a little bit. But the popularity shows you how often data is used or viewed by your business users. If I had to go into one of these sort of cards, we'll see here that the business name is called orders. We've got a business description, and we've got some tags around our data asset. Now, this is great because this allows me to go search. If I had to search for Snowflake, then we'll see our customer card being filtered, or everything else except our customer card being filtered in. The searching is quite interesting. It works across the tags, it works across the description. So all of the metadata that we capture gets exposed to our business users. So it becomes quite intuitive to find the data we're looking for. So if I had to go into this particular area, the first thing I like to show is I can go look at some sample data to make sure that this is the data that I actually do need to work with. We can see here I've got customer name, I've got a few sort of measures that I need to look at, but very importantly, what we used in here is we obfuscated the fax number as an example to show what does it look like when I start hiding PII data from the rest of my business. Fax number, it's important to keep in. As Ivan said, with replicate, we can exclude this column from the data set completely, but this is a good example of how data looks when, as the data stewards, we start obfuscating it to the organization. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to clear out my search value over here. So the second thing that we want to be looking at now is how do I, once we found this data, then how do we work with it? So I'm going to go into my demo customers over here just because we prepared this beforehand. Once again, I can view sample data. I can view all my sort of business descriptions that we added in, and very importantly, I can see the tags. We can see our KPIs over here. So we've got a good feel around what the type of data is that we're working with. I can do some analysis on the fields. So I can see here that most of my customers come from London, which is pretty nice. Just from without even looking at an analytics tool, we can very quickly see what's going on in our data. So I know as a sales manager that I want to be working with my customers, so I'm going to add this to my cart. We'll see here that it's popped up over there. Scrolling down, we can see some information. So these properties are mostly technical properties, so I'm going to skip that. But what I can see here that customer orders is related to demo orders. So I want to quickly take a look at that and see what are in my orders. Once again, I can take a look at sample data. I can see everything, and I know this is the information that I want to be looking at. So I'm going to close that out. I'm going to add this to my cart as well. And now I'm pretty much ready to start working with my information. So this is great. I've got the information I need to look at. And what I want to do is publish to ClickSense. So now this is really where that last piece of the puzzle comes in, where we went from finding the information, which traditionally is a challenge for our end users by just the nature of BI, to having a platform where I can very easily search for data on stuff that makes sense to me. I'm the sales manager. I know my stuff comes from Salesforce, or I know I only want to find production data, so I can search for data on the production tag, whatever the case might be. And once I found what I'm looking for, what I want to do, I don't want to go out of my tool into my BI tool and go and do a whole bunch of stuff. I just want to go publish to ClickSense. This is going to take a few seconds, so bear with me. This is great. As you can see, it's published straight to my Click environment. It's opening up the sheet for me. And because I'm not a BI user, I'm going to let the tool do all the work for me. So I'm going to go to Insights. It's going to take a look at what it can find with all the fields that it's looking at. And I'm going to click on Generate Insights. So now this is one of the things, Click as a BI tool, where it's really amazing. It's its ability to interpret the data for me. And produce some insights that I can use. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go add this to Sheet, because I just like looking at stuff, looking at my data in this sort of format. I want to go see how the shipping details are. I want to maybe go to, because I'm doing a country tour of Europe, I want to maybe see by postal code, whatever the case might be. Contribution by country, that should be interesting, and so on and so forth. So now I sort of found what I think I'm looking for. And if I click on this, all of a sudden, my Click dashboard is built for me. Once again, considering the fact that we're doing this as the sales manager, I could go from finding stuff that my data team prepped for me into getting this on my tablet, on my laptop while I'm sitting at the airport. I didn't need to know anything about BI. All I need to know is where to go find the data, where to click, and how to use Click's built-in ability to produce insights for me. So that's it, right? That's as simple. The beauty of this thing is in the simplicity of it. As the sales manager, I don't need to know anything. If I had to click perhaps on sort of the UK, it'll start filtering the stuff for me. I can go, maybe we can see what's going on over here. We can see all of our charts. So all of the functionality that I love from Click, it's available off the bat. I didn't need to do anything. So that's pretty much it from that perspective. We are going to keep the lines open for a little while just to address any questions. But that's pretty much it for the webinar today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Please feel free to ask some questions. I know the recording and the Q&A will be available afterwards. Cecilia will be sending out a link where to go find the recording of the webinar if you want to perhaps share this with someone. So yeah, that's it. And yeah, thanks for joining us.